Story 1. During basic training in the British Army, you had to go into the CS chamber to test your respirator. This was a relatively small room filled with CS gas, also known as tear gas. You would know quickly if your mask fit was incorrect. Usually, you were checked over, then made to take off the mask while inside and asked questions until you needed to breathe. This typically resulted in losing control and rushing for the door. Due to the rigors of basic training, I fell asleep standing up in the chamber while wearing full nuclear, biological, and chemical gear. I only realized when my mask was pulled off and I inhaled a lungful of gas. At least I made it onto the board of unique recruit mistakes. Story 2. I fell asleep with my head on a speaker in a nightclub. I was ill and had a high temperature. The person I was with would not take me home because they had just met someone. Another friend ended up taking me home after realizing what was happening. They literally carried me out of the club. Story 3. At the side of a Formula 1 race, those cars are incredibly loud. Yet somehow I still managed it, much to the bemusement of my dad. Story 4. In late winter 2009, when I was in the army and assigned to guard duty as a sentry, we were required to wear large, heavy, and warm sheep wool coats. It was late at night, and I lay on the ground, tucked myself into the coat, and fell asleep. Then I had a dream that the regiment commander was checking my post, found me asleep, and took away my automatic rifle to reprimand me afterward. I instantly woke up, terrified, and decided not to sleep anymore while on post. I never did. Story 5. Waiting for the bus. There is nothing like genuinely needing a ride home and being presumed homeless for falling asleep on the bus bench. Maybe everyone needs an actual, legitimate, stable, and genuine home. Story 6. Middle of a job interview. It was warm, they were droning on, and I blinked for about 45 seconds. Safe to say, I did not get a call back. Story 7. To this day, I am still embarrassed. For a field trip, my high school class was taken to a Holocaust museum in Michigan. I had been up all night gaming, and while I was fine walking through, when we stopped at the end to sit and listen to the guest speaker, I couldn't help but nod off in my chair. The speaker was a survivor of the concentration camps. I wish I could have heard what they had to say. Story 8. During an important meeting, I get mocked far too often for nodding off in less important situations. Sorry, I am used to sleeping in uncomfortable places, and you are all boring. Story 9. When I was little, I was very disobedient. One time, I was sent to the store to buy milk, but I bought chips instead. When I got home, my grandmother scolded me and sent me to the attic to think about my behavior. I cried and fell asleep. They looked for me for 5 hours while I was sleeping on the sacks of straw. Story 10. At work, many times before I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I hit my head on my keyboard very hard 3 times in 1 week from nodding off. I got a referral, went to see a psychiatrist, and was diagnosed and medicated within the hour. Story 11. I went out with a friend, and we had dinner and a few drinks. We were getting along famously and having a great time. It was one of those moments where there was definitely chemistry, and the energy was high. We made each other laugh a lot, which was enjoyable, and then went back to her house to relax and smoke. I got very intoxicated and fell asleep, which is how I missed out on further opportunities. Story 12. At the hairdresser's, mid-haircut. I had not long had a baby and was sleep-deprived. I remember it felt so relaxing having someone touching my head. The hairdresser let me sleep for about 30 minutes before I woke up with a crick in my neck from my head being flopped forward. Thankfully, it was quite a few years ago, and the hairdresser's is no longer there now, so I do not have to cringe anymore every time I pass the building. Story 13. Rather drunk, I went to curl up in a mate's bed and have a nap. It turns out he was more bisexual than gay and was in the middle of being intimate with a friend of ours. They ended up getting married a few years later but divorced after 3 years of marriage. Story 14. Driver's education. I was in the back seat while another student was taking their turn driving. It is almost impossible for me to stay awake as a passenger in a vehicle. It always has been. I did everything I could to stay awake, short of hitting myself in the face. Yes, I got in trouble. Story 15. Once I fell asleep after passing my physical education test. I passed right away, but it was funny when the teacher had to wake me up. Story 16. While writing an exam, I studied overnight and my brain was fried. Caffeine helped a bit, but after completing 60% of the exam in 1.5 hours out of 3, exhaustion took over me. I rested my head, thinking I would close my eyes for a second, and just dozed off. I woke up with half an hour left and completed 80 to 85% of the exam. I passed the exam thankfully, but I still wonder why the invigilator never checked on me. Story 17. At a boat, my cousin and I went fishing. For hours, we did not catch a big one. We waited and waited until we both fell asleep. Another person saw us on the boat and thought something was wrong with us, probably thinking we were in danger. They came with a rescue boat. Story 18. So many places and times. I have a yet-to-be-diagnosed sleep disorder alongside sleep apnea. I have dozed off. In lectures at university. As a child while camping with family and friends, sparking a search. At work at my desk and during meetings. When I was active in church, even when I was involved in the band. At weddings, not mine. During my wife's first labor. While driving long distances, no longer something I do. I did not take it seriously until a few years ago. I am in my early 40s, my mental acuity is poor, I live alone, and I went from being respected in my field to nearly losing my job. I wonder all the time if this is as good as it will get. Sleep is important. Story 19. When I was in junior high school, during the second break around 11:30 a.m., my classroom was on the 4th floor. We opened the window, and the wind felt really nice. Coincidentally, the spot with the best breeze was at the teacher's desk because, in our school, the teacher's desk was slightly elevated compared to the other desks and was at the same level as the window. I sat down, put my head on my arms and fell asleep. The bell rang, but I didn't hear it, and my friend didn't wake me up either. The teacher came and woke me up. I thought it was a friend, so I said, "Don't wake me up yet." But then I started hearing the class laughing so hard. I took a peek and it was the teacher. She did not punish me, thankfully, but my face from forehead to ears was beet red with embarrassment. I definitely will not do that again. Story 20. I am a retired barber, but there have been times when I started to nod off while giving a haircut. Could have been worse. I could have been doing a shave. Story 21. I fell asleep on a woman's shoulder while flying across the Pacific Ocean. She gently elbowed me to wake me up. Awkward. Story 22. I went camping, heard shots about 100 meters away, fell asleep, and woke up in shock the next morning. Story 23. I was an engineer in the main engine room of a 378-foot cutter in the Coast Guard. We were extremely busy trying to get it ready to go underway. My job was to pump out some oil from a bilge under each 3-story diesel engine. I had to squeeze inside a coffin-sized compartment to reach the lowest bilge. It was dry and did not stink, so I decided to rest. It would be at least an hour before anyone came looking for me. I took a 45-minute nap and continued working as if nothing had happened. I never get to share that story because it's too unusual to mention, but this seemed like the perfect place. Military life as a newly enlisted person is exhausting. It takes a lot to want to sleep in a stinky crawlspace buried under 10 feet of pipe and machinery. Story 24. I was at a friend's wedding, jet-lagged from a long flight. The ceremony was beautiful but long, and I dozed off in the pew. My head hit the hymn book, making a loud thud. Everyone turned to look, and I wanted to disappear. Story 25. Seeing the comedian Neil Brennan. We had just attended the first day of New York Comic Con and then gone out to a Michelin-rated restaurant. By the time we sat down in a dark and quiet little theater, my body just shut down. I felt bad because Neil kept looking at me every time I jerked awake. Story 26. I had a date with someone. We went to see American Sniper in the theater. She slept through it. I gave up trying to wake her up. About 10 years later, we are married. Story 27. Visiting a friend's house for the first time. I could not find the bathroom. I was about 10 years old and it was during a sleepover. In the middle of the night, dark and confused, I urinated in the closet. Story 28. Left my girlfriend's house at 1:30 a.m., about 20 miles from my house. I remember the first part of the drive until I got to the highway. The next thing I knew, I was pulling into the driveway of my house. To this day, I have no recollection of how I got home. Scared me a lot. Story 29. One time I fell asleep at the end of my shift and completely missed the end. Everyone had already left, but luckily the cleaning lady woke me up. Story 30. At my desk at work, I had a newborn at home who was not sleeping well. I caught myself drifting off a few times and was then awoken by my manager, who was also a good friend, so it was not a problem. Story 31. In class at university, I guess. Not fully asleep, just fading in and out. Suddenly jerking awake, and there are a couple of minutes missing. Story 32. I did not sleep well on the way to another city where we were going to compete in the Evita Games for judo. I am from Argentina and was 14 years old. I fell asleep in the hotel, and some hours after arrival we had to go to the place where we were going to compete. I nearly lost the chance to participate, but the teachers responsible for us went back just in time to find me. It was not entirely my fault because there were kids talking on the bus until 4 a.m., and I had trouble sleeping. Story 33. Grand rounds in surgery. My staff professor was giving the presentation. I was sitting in the front row, fell asleep, and snored loudly. Apparently, everything stopped. My fellow resident elbowed me. I woke up to everyone looking at me and laughing. Sleep apnea. Story 34. Was out on the battery. Ended up getting a cab home with a coworker. As she was getting out, she said, "Pay the man and hurry up." I hurried up, we got down to it, and I fell asleep. Story 35. Not long ago, one night, one of the people with us went missing for a long time. We searched the pub and found him sitting in a toilet cubicle, jeans and boxers around his ankles, door wide open, fast asleep. Story 36. I have a hard time sleeping in appropriate situations, and I do not think I have ever slept in an inappropriate one. Story 37. I was staying with my friend's sister and her girlfriend. I was sleeping on the floor next to their bed. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard them whispering about which sex toy they were about to use. I never spoke a word about it. It was the purple one in case anyone is curious. Story 38. I called it time traveling. I would completely zone out riding my motorcycle and wake up when I got home, not remembering most of the trip. People would get upset when I did not acknowledge them waving at me. I did not even know when or where this would have been. Story 39. When my girlfriend tried to show me how she masturbates, I never had such a relaxing feeling. Story 40. I've got a video clip of me fast asleep on top of my command track Model 577, with a battery of Model 109 Paladins conducting a firing mission 300 yards away, which is nose-tweaking distance for something that loud. It had been a long field problem. I was off shift and tired. Story 41. My girlfriend Sue, a lovely, slight little girl, and I fell asleep at the drive-in. By the time we woke up, it was well past our curfew. I woke her up and was very concerned about what the incident would do to her reputation. This was back in the late 1950s, so we had to come up with a plausible story for her parents so we would not get into trouble. Story 42. My mom and aunt are fighting like there is no tomorrow. I do not know, their voices now sound like music to me. Story 43. I had been awake for 36 hours, traveling to Poland from the Czech Republic with the specific intention of visiting Auschwitz on the first day there. On the tour, we were taken to a dark room to watch a film about the facility and the piles of personal belongings displayed in the museum. It was dark and warm. It had been 36 hours since I last slept. Gone. Story 44. While I was having a root canal treatment, it was embarrassing. I had multiple visits afterward, and my dentist always told me not to sleep during the procedure. I started drinking coffee before visiting her. I don't know why the procedure made me so sleepy. Story 45. I once fell asleep in a lounge area at a community college. I was not informed about the display case where I was being set up for a fundraiser. Story 46. My first job ever, I had to check bread before it went into the packaging machine. I fell asleep holding onto a defective loaf. I woke up to coworkers laughing because a pile of bread about waist-high was next to me. Story 47. Not me, but I'll say it anyway since it could have very well been. I witnessed one of the recent Charlie Hebdo trials at the law courthouse in Paris this year as part of my law and sociology course. The room was crowded yet very spaced. Far back were the lawyers on one side, the defendants in a glass cabin on the other with translators who were Pakistani, and then in the middle were 5 magistrates, a president, half a dozen jurors, and as expected, many police officers. I have never seen a room this quiet. I was very tired. I wanted to sleep badly, but did not want any problems with the officers around the room, so I watched the whole thing squinting. My friend next to me did not make it 15 minutes into the trial and collapsed into his seat like a rag doll. It took less than 5 seconds for 3 officers to pressure him. He folded under the pressure immediately and watched the rest of the trial with red eyes. I have never had to hold back laughter this big in my entire life. Story 48. After the initial coronavirus vaccine, I had to sleep a lot. I was at a casual memorial event when I kept falling asleep repeatedly. Finally, my husband and I decided it was best for me to go to the car for a while. I came back in a little bit. It was not a I can fight it sleep. Story 49. At the movie theater during Transformers, I had smoked a large marijuana cigarette with my friends before we went inside. Story 50. At an old job, I fell asleep while monitoring tests. I was not required to monitor, but the room where the tests were administered was also my office. I got written up because the actual proctor reported me. I quit soon after. The job was too boring anyway. Story 51. A date. We were going to the movie theater to watch South Park. Bigger, longer, and uncut, but once we got there, she wanted to watch Star Wars Episode 1, even though I had already seen it. Needless to say, I could not stay awake through that movie watching it a second time. Story 52. First day of work after I finished my bachelor's degree. I couldn't sleep the night before, and of course my first day had an extra 2-hour staff meeting, which meant working 11 hours straight with no sleep. That's also when I realized my 50-year-old assistant was sent from God, because for 2 whole hours she kept nudging me to keep me awake and even prevented me from falling out of my chair at one point, barely containing her laugh. As far as I'm aware, no one but her noticed. Story 53. My wife was in labor with our first child. At about 3 a.m., I fell asleep in the hospital while she was squeezing my hand during contractions. Story 54. Friend's birthday. Accidentally fell asleep next to his girlfriend who was already sleeping. He was not happy. Story 55. During an important Future Farmers of America meeting on Zoom during quarantine when I was in high school, I hadn't been sleeping well and was completely exhausted. I just turned off my camera and muted myself so they wouldn't see me sleeping. One of the other Future Farmers of America student officers got mad at me for it, but I literally couldn't help it. Story 56. While teleprompting a live news program, the anchor was a professional and did not need it. Some anchors rely heavily on teleprompters, while others disregard them entirely. Story 57. I babysat 13-year-old girls. They wanted me to watch this silly movie. When the parents came home, they found us all asleep on the couch. Luckily, they know me and my worried attitude convinced them. They weren't all on me, but some had their heads resting on me. It was the price of falling asleep first. Story 58. Meeting with other engineers at work was an absolutely terrible experience. This happened a year ago, but I still think about it. I will never attend a meeting without at least 7 hours of sleep again. Story 59. The night before I met my ex-girlfriend's parents, I had to stay up all night because I had many missing assignments. The next evening, I was having dinner with her parents, and the next thing I knew, I blacked out right at the table from lack of sleep. Story 60. Fell asleep in a university class at the end of a long day. I passed gas loudly, right in the middle of the lecture of my favorite professor. I was alone in that part of the hall, so everyone knew it was me. After a brief pause, the professor resumed as if nothing had happened. Nobody said anything afterward. Story 61. In a simulated airplane seat at the Evergreen Aviation Museum while watching the history of the spruce goose. Story 62. Anytime I fell asleep as a kid after my mother had already woken me up once, It was still the scariest experience ever. Story 63, Courtroom. When I was in my last year of middle school, I had to do an internship for a week with a lawyer to learn about the job. She had an appointment and I was not allowed to be there since it was confidential, so she told me to go to the courthouse and observe a hearing. I fell asleep on a bench at the back of the courtroom. Story 64. After I gave birth to my son, I hemorrhaged to the point that I was dying. Nurses swarmed in silently and started working on me. It was terrifying. I looked over at my husband, who was just sleeping peacefully with our newborn next to him. He said he had woken up during it and decided to go back to sleep because the nurses were taking care of it, and if he was about to be a single father, he needed to rest. Story 65. After going out at bars and strip club with a coworker, I was so intoxicated that I fell asleep at the subway for about an hour. Story 66. I fell asleep on the bus to basic training. When you go from processing to the other side of the base for the shark attack, someone stole my hat from my hand. There were 300 kids, and I was the only one without a hat. It was not a fun day. I had to wear my winter battle dress uniform cap all through summer basic training. Story 67. Embarrassingly, I have actually fallen asleep during sex twice. Once when she was on top, once when I was performing oral sex on her. To be fair, at the time I was married to an insomniac who seemed to feel that if she could not sleep, then I was not allowed to either. So I nodded off doing a bunch of different things. But the prompt was most inappropriate situation. Story 68. I have been a barber for more than 15 years. Many people have fallen asleep in my chair, but there have been times when I was so tired that I fell asleep while giving a haircut. I think that is quite inappropriate. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.